Hello everyone, how are everyone feeling? How's everyone doing? Yes, I'm just beginning a new series of videos. I'd like to explore theological discussions that have been with mankind since the dawn of our creation. Yes, the first video which I'm taking is on the discussion of we must always begin with God's forgiveness. We must always begin with the forgiveness that God offers us. I am no psychiatrist or psychologist, I should say, but I believe that the reason why Christendom, people who follow Christ, this group of believers, I believe that the reason why we haven't made the progress that Christ intended for us is because in the beginning we started out in a state that was not influential towards progress. Now, we all remember that garden scene, the Garden of Eden, when we have the man and the woman, we have the two in the garden. God gave them this beautiful, fantastic garden. This garden was destined for the whole of humanity. God created humankind and God gave humankind this paradise, this beautiful piece of property. Everything was there. But alas, humankind ate of the fruit which God instructed humankind not to eat of. And so we remember the scene when humankind was expelled from this paradise, or I should say our first great, and etc. grandparents were expelled from this beautiful paradise for basically, I guess you could say, committing the first sin. Basically what they did was they went against God, their creator. They went against God. God instructed them in one thing: you may eat of any fruit in the garden, but you must not eat of this fruit. And they ate of that fruit and were expelled from the garden. Now, as I said, I am no psychologist, but I firmly believe that we hold that garden scene within our innermost core, and that we as Christians, we carry that garden scene with us subconsciously as we walk, as we develop, as we grow into what we are. And I believe that it is that garden scene that is slowing our development, slowing our evolution, slowing us down, because as Christians, we go back to that original scene, that scene in Genesis, and we think of God as being this God who will eradicate us, who will get rid of us, who will banish us for making mistakes. So I believe that we must always begin with God's forgiveness, and that if we can make this as a place to begin, if we can make God's forgiveness as a place where we can begin, then we shall prosper and we shall bear fruit. So what is forgiveness, and how can it be that God is all forgiving? Well, that is one of the mysteries. That is a mystery of faith. That is something that we believe. Something that we believe when we read the New Testament, the Gospels, when we read the narrative of Christ, our Lord Jesus Christ. When we read the Bible, we come to an understanding that God is this God who is eternally forgiving. So what does that actually mean, to be eternally forgiving, I should say? Well, what that means is that God, the God who we believe in, is a God who will always forgive so long as we ask for his forgiveness. God's forgiveness, if you like, is like an open door, a door that never closes, because that is the very nature of God. the nature of God is to forgive as many times as the one who seeks forgiveness asks. But what is this forgiveness that God gives? Well, this forgiveness is basically a regrouping or an acceptance of the individual who asks. What I mean by regrouping is that we are put back into the fold, so to speak. Many times we have not even left the fold, but we have this belief within us that what we have done has been so terrible that we can surely no longer be acceptable to God. But no, we must always begin, not in the garden. No, we must always begin with God's forgiveness. And if we can always begin each day of our lives with God's forgiveness, we shall have a much better day, a much better week. Because we shall not be fearful that if we are to fall by the wayside, if we are to fall along the journey, wherever the journey takes us on this daily basis, we have this belief that what we must do is get up from our fall. And that, in a sense, is God's forgiveness, us getting up from our fall. We are not to be people who make mistakes and then wallow in our mistakes like pigs in the mud. No, if we make mistakes, we are to correct our mistakes. And we do this by physically changing what we have done. If we break a glass and the glass did not belong to us, we buy another glass for the one who owned the glass, so to speak. We have to have action in our daily lives. We don't just ask for forgiveness, but we make this forgiveness of God be actualized. If we're driving a car down the road and we accidentally bump into a pedestrian, we stop the car and we see if the pedestrian is okay. And we do whatever we can to help the pedestrian who we accidentally bumped into. Maybe we visit them in hospital, maybe we help them financially in the best way that we can. There are many things that we can do to actualize God's forgiveness. God forgives us for hitting that poor pedestrian. We have asked our Lord for forgiveness. Sorry, I made a mistake. I hit a pedestrian. But we must actualize that forgiveness by doing something about it. God's forgiveness is not something that requires no response from ourselves. No, we must respond to the forgiveness of God that God grants to us. And so this talk has been about we must always begin with God's forgiveness. This eternal forgiveness, this infinite forgiveness, this forgiveness that has no limits. God's forgiveness is like a garden of flowers that are for everyone's picking. We don't have to go down to the marketplace and purchase a bunch of God's forgiveness. No, God's forgiveness is free. God's forgiveness is growing in our own gardens. But we must participate in this forgiveness. We participate in this forgiveness by correcting whatever it is, if it can be corrected, by the way. We do what we can to the best of our ability, and so we share in God's forgiveness, and God's forgiveness is in our lives.